Hey everyone, this is John from EastCoastArmory.com, and I'm here today with a project start video for this 1/6 scale radio controlled Armortek Russian T34 85. The model that you see here is being built for a commission and belongs to a private collector. As I often mention in my build videos, I often take on commission build projects from vehicles ranging from 1/35 scale all the way up to 1/6 scale. As for availability and pricing information, that information will be best by contacting me through the email address listed below, which is info@eastcoastarmory.com. As for the base starter kit, I will be utilizing this 1/6 scale T34 85 kit from Armortek. Now, if anyone was a frequent viewer of the channel, the name Armortek should sound very familiar, as I've built several of their kits in the past and can be seen on the ECA channel in several build series that I've done throughout the years. This build here will be no different. As for the kit, just like all Armortek kits themselves, they are comprised of all laser cut and CNC cut aluminum plates, which are all bolt together assembly. Now, before anyone goes ahead and writes in the comments section on just how to buy one of these kits, or I went to Armortek's website and this kit doesn't seem to be found anywhere, the answer to that is that Armortek does not release kits on a continual basis, in that they just don't have tens of thousands of these kits being produced at any given time. The way Armortek produces kits is that they announce a new kit and they offer as a pre-order. Once all the pre-orders are sold, they then go into production of these kits, and then once the kits are ready to ship, they then announce another vehicle as a pre-order, and the cycle goes on and on. This vehicle here was released by them back in 2011, and as of the date of this video, this has been the only run of T34s that were made. As for the total number of T34s, I want to say the number is somewhere in the 70s, or possibly lower. Now, if anyone wants to track down one of their already released kits, their kits do pop up from time to time on the secondhand market. I've seen several of their models in every condition, from virgin kit to pre-assembled kit, on places like eBay, as well as I believe even on Craigslist one or two have emerged. However, the best place to track down a secondhand Armortek model is through the Armortek forum. The link is listed below, as well as also listed in the video description. On the Armortek forum, there's a specific section for classifieds, as well as for sale and wanted. There, customers who have Armortek kits and want to sell them for a number of reasons post the classified on that link there, and the interested party can make contact with them and obtain the kit. This model here was obtained in just that manner. The customer found the kit in a virgin unassembled state by a seller. He purchased the kit from the individual and he sent it to me to go ahead and build the model up to completion. This model did start off as a virgin Armortek kit. However, I'm not going to be able to do an unboxing portion, as the model was reboxed by the secondhand dealer, and so the unboxing portion is not necessary for this build. As you can see, I have the hull panels fully assembled. We will be going into the work that got the tank to this condition in this video. As for the model's construction, this is all basically built out of the box with the Armortek design. As you can see, the hull features two integral bulkheads, which are used to keep the upper hull together. As for the lower hull, the panels are secured to the floor panel here with that of two large square CNC aluminum blocks, which run the entire length of the hull. These offer both structural support as well as also give a good mounting base for that of the suspension, which will be added in the upcoming videos. Just like with all Armortek kits, the pieces are all CNC'd aluminum and come pre-drilled and are all installed together with that of fasteners. All the fasteners have been bolted on with that of red Loctite in order to ensure a permanent bond so the fasteners will never get loose while the tank is in operation. With the way the fasteners bolt on, you will have some bodywork to contend with, but this is average for just about all Armortek kits. Just like on all the Armortek kits, the fasteners get blended thoroughly into the tank's side hull panels with that of the bodywork. As you can see, the bodywork has been done briefly to the upper hull fasteners. However, as the build progresses, the more concentration will be spent on these locations here, improving them further from the way you see it in this video. However, this is a good start. to the bodywork, and everything else can just be added upon the way you see it over here. One crucial component that needs to be added prior to the hull being completely bolted together is that of the mounting of the final drives. Now, this is where the kit on the T34 is different compared to the other Armortek builds that you've seen posted on the ECA channel, namely that of the Tiger, Panther, or even the Sherman for that matter, in which you can go ahead and assemble the hull, and then after the hull progresses, then you could start mounting on the final drive components. On the Armortek T34, this is a different story. On the Armortek T34, the final drive needs to be assembled in a cluster, and then that cluster gets mounted to the inside portion of the hull, to which then the fasteners mount from the outside portion of the hull into the final drive casing, sealing everything together. Now, this is important to get done in this phase here of the build, as once the hull progresses past this point here, due to the hull shape of the T34 rear hull angles, you're not going to be able to insert these components into the hull once fully assembled, and it's going to be a bit of a chore to go ahead and undo some of the fasteners to remove some of the panels in order to get the components mounted. As for the component breakdown, they are in the format that you see here. The format is similar to basically all the other Armortek builds that have been built and posted on the ECA channel, in which you have the main drive gears, which are made out of CNC steel. They're all one single piece, very nicely machined. You have two final drive casings, which again are all CNC'd aluminum. With the T34 here, you have the two blister components, which house the final drive components. And on the T34, this portion here emerges out from the hull and the rear plate. As you can see, it's all solid piece of CNC aluminum that's pre-drilled and tapped. You also have a set of ball bearings, as well as rubber seals, which are seen on all the Armortek builds and do a adequate job at preventing any type of foreign dirt and material to enter into the all-important grease housing of the final drive. Now, here are the final drives in various stages of assembly. The unit up here is all ready for its addition of its final drive gear, as well as the grease, which is mounted on the inside. And this unit here is ready for assembly. I went ahead and took a pause from doing the assembly just to walk through some of the procedures, which I commonly do in these videos. If you can see that the components have first been thoroughly primed. The primer was added to the metal, and this is a procedure that I like to do on all of the builds. Now, when it comes time for insertion of the gasket needs to be put on in a very specific way. As you can see from the instruction sheet, there's actually a cutaway, which, if I can get in focus, you can see the correct orientation of the assembly. Basically, what they want is that the bottom portion, which is the smooth section here, of the gasket goes down, and this section here is on the outside. On this kit here, the gasket just pops right in. It's a very loose fit. And unlike some of the other builds which needed a little bit of coercion in order to get into the recess. Once the gasket is in place, it is then time to mount on the bearings. Now, there are two bearings per final drive. One is on the outside of the housing, and the second is on the inside. The bearings simply get press fitted on and tapped in place with a rubber mallet on either end to make sure that they are in the correct location. Once fully assembled, the component will look like this. Once the bearings are installed, the piece will have a nice spin to it, and you are then ready for the next step of the installation, which is that of the final drive's gear. For the gear itself, one procedure that I always recommend and do on all of my Armortek builds is that of the removal of the center burr, which is left over from the CNCing of the gear stock. To remove, that's done with a simple Dremel with a cutting stone, and a quick little pass, and the burr is thoroughly removed. With the burr removed, it allows for the component to sit flush inside of the gear housing without even the slightest bit of interference with the burr. Once it's time to start putting the gear into the final drive, it is at this point here where you need to get the component nice and lubricated. As for the lubrication itself, I use my normal red grease, which I've used on just about all of the Armortek builds that I've done. And in my usual manner, a decent amount of grease is added to the component. It's added to both the inside as well as the outside portion of the gear. I also added a smear of grease on the inside of the well as well. It is important to get this component nice and lubricated, as it will prevent wear of the component over time, as well will also prevent any sort of corrosion that can happen to the mild steel gear stock, specifically if the tank is driven in any moisture or any other type of conditions. As for the grease, it is simply applied with my finger, like you can see here. And don't be afraid to use a liberal amount of grease in order for the component to be nice and lubed. And once the lubrication has been added to both the gear and the well itself, it is time to just simply slide it into its final drive housing. And there we have it. Moving our way to the front plate of the T34 takes us to this section over here. Now, one thing that's, like I may have mentioned earlier, is that one interesting feature that the Armortek T34 has is that the version of the T34 that Armortek chose to model is that of a very early pattern T34-76. Now, when Armortek released the kit, they released it in two options. You can build it as an earlier pattern 76, or you can build it as a later pattern T34-85. However, several of the components that were supplied with the kit were done for the 85 conversion. One area that was left standard on both kits was that of the front of the hull. The front hull, found on the earlier pattern 76, had a round, blunt nose to it and had a row of exposed fasteners. This is specifically true on the top portion of the plate. Currently, keep in mind the tank is upside down. Now, on the Armortek kit, the way the plates are assembled, they are very nicely engineered, which is typical for Armortek. To help secure the front portion of the hull in place, they have here a solid CNC'd aluminum block, which acts similar to that of like a trunnion, which everything bolts to it, and it really is the backbone of the tank. Now, on the Armortek kit, the piece is blunt, like I said before, and this will need to be adjusted as the later versions of the T34, specifically the T34-85. This section here was pointy in appearance instead of the blunt, round appearance that's found on this kit. Now, the fasteners, which are used to hold everything in place, are exposed on the stock Armortek kit, utilizing that of cap screws. On the later production version of the T34, everything was welded, and so these fasteners here were no longer present. On the model here, to bring the front up to the specs of a later production T34, the front needs to undergo a little bit of a conversion. Step one is the way I have it here. The external fasteners have been modified so that they are now sunk into the plate. Currently, you can see all the row of fasteners that have been bolted to the plate and secure everything firmly in place. Of course, Loctite is utilized on all these fasteners. Now, in order to mod them, I went ahead and drilled out the sections of the plate where they get bolted on with that of wells. With this allows me to add countersink fasteners, which will now allow me to add the addition of the bodywork, which I'll then go through the process to sand them down, make them nice and flush. Once they are sanded down fully and flush, I could then focus on modifying that of the front lip of the vehicle. While on the topic of the bodywork, that takes us directly to the side sections here of the hull. Now, as you notice, the row of fasteners, which were mentioned earlier, in which hold the side hull to the lower plate, as well as to the internal suspension block mounting system, These fasteners here are currently in their final phase of the bodywork and will soon be polished away with some sandpaper, leaving for a nice smooth finish. Now, moving our way to the sponson, before I could go ahead and add the sculpted well beads to the sponson, you will see that the way the Armortek kit is designed, you have these little rectangular sections here found on the plate. These sections here are laser cut by Armortek and are actually bent upward and inward in order for that of the fastener mounting point, which locks the sponson to the side of the hull. Before I could go ahead and add on the detail well beads that need to be added, these sections here need to be deleted, flush, and then, which will give me a nice smooth surface to apply the well beads. This procedure of filling in these areas here is a common feature that needs to be done on Armortek tanks, as this design of sponson is commonly used on the other kits which have been released by Armortek over the years. With the majority of the bodywork now completed in regards to removal of the fastener head locations, it is now time to go ahead and perform the front bow modification. In order to alter the shape of the piece, I went ahead and developed this piece of equipment right here. What this little bit of detailing will do is that once fitted, will externally modify the shape of the piece, converting it from the earlier pattern round nose to that of the later style pike nose. The way this is done is that I went ahead and took a piece of brass angle. The brass angle was cut to the same width here of the model's hull. Now, what also, when I went ahead and did was, I went ahead and soldered on 3 sections of modified fasteners. These fasteners here had their heads clipped off, and then they were ground to a point, and then were soldered to the center portions here of the angle. On the hull itself, I went ahead and drilled 3 matching locations. Here you can see the 3 locations that were drilled in more detail now that I'm closer in. Now, when it comes time to drilling out these locations, you have to be very careful with exactly where you drill them out. As you can see, since this plate here is held on with a row of fasteners, the fasteners actually stagger each other, and when it comes time to mounting on this mounting fastener for that of the conversion rim, you don't want to hit a fastener which is located inside the metal. So care must be exhibited in order to find these 3 locations. Now, the section here in the middle is not going to be an issue, as there's no equipment on this side over here. However, on the 2 end versions that I have here, this is going to be a problematic location, simply due for the fact that on the T34, the idler adjusting equipment is located in this section here and will make contact with any fastener that is in this location. And here's the front now completed and ready for the next step. The angle has been flared in with that of the welds. Now, the way the T34 is actually built is that on the front there is a large triangular portion of steel that is solid, and then the other plates go ahead and weld directly to it. This was a very convenient type assembly for the model, in that where the seams are, where the brass angle meant the aluminum plate, was exactly where the welds would have been on the real tank, so the welds were simply sculpted on and concealed that of the seams, and no bodywork was needed for this component. And here we have a inside view of the front portion of the model. This aluminum bar that we have here is the front trunnion, and it is what really connects the entire front area of the model together. Now, like I said before, to mount on the brass angle, this is facilitated via 3 fasteners in these 3 locations. I have 1, 2, and 3. Now, because of the idler equipment, like I mentioned before, where once the idler equipment is fully installed, you're going to make contact with the fastener over here, I had to go ahead and create sunk-in wells in order for the piece to clear, as well as for the fasteners can be bolted on. As you can see, they are nice and flush with that of the trunnion plate. Now, in addition to using red Loctite on these 2 versions on the end, I also went ahead and submerged them with that of epoxy. The epoxy, in addition to the Loctite, will make for a nice permanent bond, and this piece here will never have any issues of it backing out. For the one in the center, the epoxy was not necessary as it wasn't in the little tub that was needed to be machined, and simple red Loctite was just used to keep it in place. Like I said, the one on the other end does have the epoxy present. Now here you can also see that of the brass bushing, which is used for that of the idler, and it was mounted in order to test the component to see if there was clearance, which of course there was. And here are the sponsons with their bodyworks now completed. As you can see, those rectangular sections have been thoroughly blended in with that of the rest of the plate, and the seam has been deleted with that of a sculpted weld bead. Now, if you notice, no weld beads have yet to been added to this section here of the sponson. These will be added after the suspension work is concluded, as you can see, there are several other equipment mounting locations on the side here of the hull. Obviously, once they get mounted on, there's going to be some body work that needs to be made in order to make the hull nice and seamless. The welds will be added after this body work is concluded. While on the body work, you can also see that the top fasteners, or I should say the bottom row fasteners, have their bodywork now basically completed and are now blended into the lower hull. At this point here, the entire lower hull, both interior and exterior, will be receiving its coat of primer. After that, I can then progress on the suspension. Moving our way to the final drive, as you can see, the welds have now been added. The cast texturing was added previously and was also discussed. Now, one more detail that needs to be added to the final drive is that of a drainage plug, which is located in this section here, in order to drain out the transmission fluid for servicing. More information on this will come in an upcoming video. Here we have the rear plate that I was just mentioning. On the earlier version of the T34, the Armortek version is that of the small square engine axis plate, which was common on the 1940 and I believe 1941 variants of the T34-76. This being a T34-85, this small little hatch would have been inaccurate, so Armortek has, just for the 85 kits, this version of the rear plate, which is basically identical to the early unit, with the exception of having a large, round axis engine hatch, as opposed to the smaller square one. Other than that, the kits are basically identical, as I mentioned before. Here we can see the model just before I go ahead and get the hull into primer. You can see the insides and how the model is all. Here I have the model's final drives, which have also been added. Here you can see the company name, the date, and the actual production number that this model is, which is number 28, which is considered a very low production number, considering there's about 60 to 50 of these kits that were released. The final drive was assembled. As you can see, I went ahead and taped it up in order to prevent any sort of debris from going inside of the portion, which can cause a mess. And here's the model now, all with its coat of primer added. From this point here, I can now progress on the model suspension, as well as the remainder of the lower hull components. Currently, the first of the hull components that have been added are these two brass bushings that are found on the front portion of the hull, which would be for the front idlers. The bushings are machined by Armortek. They are brass and are standard on all of their tank kits, and are also to the same quality that are found on their kits as well. Now, the pieces fit on in a very nice, snug manner. The tolerances are very, very tight for getting these pieces installed, which is a good thing, as you don't want to have these bushings be loose on you, even when everything is fully together, as that can lead to some issues. The pieces were simply installed with that of a rubber mallet and were coerced into place to the way you see it here. Now, after the pieces were mounted in, some material does need to be removed on the inside portion in order for the front idler section to fit on in a nice, smooth manner. The tolerances are very, very tight on these pieces at first, and in order to loosen them up, this was done with that of a Dremel with a sanding drum, going at nice slow speeds, which was able to slowly and evenly remove the necessary material, just enough for the piece to fit in. As for a sneak peek, here we have the front idler shaft. As you can see, it is a substantial bit of equipment. It is comprised of a single piece of CNC'd steel. It's off-center, which is typical for these type of components. And the piece will fit into the section the way you see it here. As you can see, there's not any play with this piece, as it's held in a nice firm manner. Now, like I said before, some material did need to be removed on the bushing itself in order for the piece to firmly fit on. If you install these pieces on your own build and you're trying to get this component or a similar component, as this type of feature is seen on other Armortek kits, and you need to get it into place and are having a very difficult time, stop what you're doing. You do need to remove a little bit of material, as if you try to coerce and blump this guy into place with that of a hammer, you're going to have issues and will actually cause damage to some of the parts. Definitely not recommended. Something like this definitely requires a nice light touch in order to get the pieces to fit in. After the hand fitting is done, the piece will give you years of unintermittent successful driving. And with that, that wraps up this project start video for this 1/6 scale radio controlled Armortek T34 85. If you like this video, stop by and like us on Facebook, where there are more photographs of this particular build that have been posted, as well as the other 1/6 and smaller scale builds that have been posted on the channel and have been built in the past. In addition to that, don't forget to swing by eastcoastarmory.com for more 1/6 and 1/16 scale builds and detail components. Thanks for watching.